If we're just operating from the neck up in this very heady cognitive space, then we're kind of ripping ourselves off of all of the tools that could be in our toolbox when we start to understand the connection with the body and the importance of the body as well.
Welcome to the Leaders Mindset, where we bring you conversations with leaders who are making an impact in business and our communities. Today, I'm here with Madeleine Eliza. She's coming to us all the way from Australia. She's the founder of Bhakti Lab, and she helps soul-led entrepreneurs turn visions into reality. Thanks for being here today, Madeleine.
Thanks so much for having me, Jason. It's great to be here.
Yeah, and it's a little bit of a funny story how we got connected and how you got here today, because for another episode of this podcast, I accidentally tagged one of your businesses in a post for an episode of this podcast, and I meant to tag somebody else's business that had a very similar name. And you very politely let me know that, and it was great. But we got to chatting about what we each do, and now we're here today talking about what you do on the podcast.
Yeah, it felt very serendipitous to connect with you. Yeah, thrilled to be here.
Well, that's the great thing about podcasting and the internet.
Absolutely.
All right, so let's start with what everybody's question probably is right now. What is a soul-led leader, and how do you help them through the Bhakti Lab initiative?
Yes, great question. I came to this interest in soul-led leadership, I think partly through my own journey, where like a lot of people, I kind of ticked the boxes and climbed the ladder and kicked the goals and followed all the steps, and then kind of found myself searching for something a bit deeper. And I think the concept of being led by the soul is particularly relevant in this ever increasing age of AI that we find ourselves in, because really the soul is what distinguishes us as human beings. And for me, the concept of soul-led leadership is, I'm interested in working with founders and entrepreneurs who are driven not by something surface level, but who have got this work in them that they just need to get out into the world, where they feel compelled. I think that's often the soul speaking to us. And something else that I've learned along my journey, not just through leadership, but through the kind of personal journey and growth experiences that I've been on, is that the language of the soul is often one of dissent. And we can build this carefully constructed life, but if there's something just at us on the inside that is speaking to us that we need to get this out into the world, those are the visions that I'm interested in supporting founders to birth into the world.
Yeah, and you certainly had a little bit of dissent in your soul, because before you were doing this, your background was leading operations in high growth companies. So tell us about some of the companies you worked with and what you helped them achieve.
Yeah, I've had an amazing journey working with lots of wonderful businesses here in Australia. I actually started my career at Groupon, which your US listeners will be familiar with. So that was my introduction to startup culture, and I got pretty hooked in the early days that Groupon launched in Sydney. And I then we moved to where I am now, which is just near Byron Bay on the coast, on the most easterly point of Australia. And I started working for an online travel company called Tripadeal. And it was a small startup when I joined. There was the founder and one other staff member and myself in a small office doing, day trips, kayaking tours, that kind of thing. And over the next 3 years, the business grew from $500,000 in revenue to 2 million to 20 million and then to 80 million in revenue. It was this crazy exponential period of growth. We were the fastest growing company in Australia 2 years running. And it was really an exercise in listening to the customer and pivoting very quickly and just going for it and prioritizing speed. And we then consolidated all the things that needed to be cleaned up afterwards. But yeah, it was an incredible rocket ride. And since then, I've worked with some other e-commerce brands. I worked with a lifestyle e-commerce brand called Seed and Sprout, and I'm still supporting them today, and with some tech companies and online education businesses as well. So often in that scale-up zone where the business is doing kind of between $1 and $5 million in revenue, and we're really grappling with those challenges of scale, the growing pains, bringing team on board, needing to refine product offerings, needing to get really focused on the strategy. And my role has been in operational leadership, so chief operating officer or general manager roles, often working very closely with founders. So I came across this book called Rocket Fuel by Gino Wickman, where he talks about the two types of leadership needed in a high growth organization. And it's the visionary, which is your quintessential entrepreneur with all the big ideas, who's running 1,000,000 miles an hour, and the integrator, who's the person who takes the ideas and works out how to translate the vision into a tactical pathway for delivery. And I read that and went, that's how I describe what I do, because I didn't have a language for it before. So yeah, I've been really privileged to have some amazing experiences along the way.
Yeah, you've certainly helped a number of companies achieve that hockey stick growth that every company wants to see, right? What were some of the lessons you learned from corporate about leadership that helped you working with these smaller companies as you helped them scale up?
I think,
or what were maybe a better question is, what did you have to leave behind from corporate as you moved into these smaller tech companies?
Yes. Well, a large chunk of my career has been in startups, so it's sort of become normal for me. But certainly from those earlier experiences, even something like Groupon, which was a startup, but it was all completely funded, the Australian business anyway, and had a complete business model. So it was a subsidiary of the German Groupon business. So everything was like the playbook was completely written. We were following step 1, 2, 3, 4, and just it was all very formulaic and laid out. And there was a lot of rigor in that process. There were a lot of processes and systems. Everything was established. So there was quite a sense of stability, even though Groupon grew very quickly as well. And then stepping into that wild exponential growth at Tripodale, that's the steepest hockey stick growth curve I've been involved with. A lot of that had to go out the window because we were building systems on the fly. We didn't have time to do the tech development work that we really needed to do to support that growth, particularly in terms of our CRM, because we had a pretty basic website to sell these pretty basic travel products that we were selling at the beginning of that journey. And then it rapidly evolved to selling very complex multi-component tours, including like a tour package, hotel accommodation, flights, cruises. And we kind of cobbled it all together in Google Sheets is how we built that business. So a lot of the lessons from a more established corporate business don't really apply there, because you're in this Wild West and you are building things on the fly and have to get very comfortable with being uncomfortable. That's my advice to anybody who's in a growth curve like that, is that it doesn't feel tidy. Things never feel like they're properly finished. It feels very scrappy and very messy. So we had an experience of bringing on, as the business grew, needing to bring on more senior leaders with more corporate travel experience. And there was this tension point between the employees who had started with the company and were used to it being scrappy and kind of enjoyed that startup environment and felt like it was getting a bit serious now that all these processes and procedures were coming on. And then the more corporate senior staff coming in just saying, this is a madhouse. I don't know how you guys are pulling this off. So there was a real tension there. But I think implementing as much rigor as you can, just to answer your question about what you would bring across from corporate, implementing as much rigor as you can around processes and procedures, especially around people, because I think when you grow like that, managing the people side of it is one of the biggest challenges. People, the product, and the financials were the three most challenging aspects, I think, of managing a business like that. So things like having clearly written position descriptions and KPIs across the board, even if things are scrappy and you're running really fast, I think making sure you've got that in place can save you a lot of trouble down the line. Having regular performance reviews in place, having those kind of processes and guardrails around people management is something that I would recommend. No matter how scrappy and how fast you're growing, it's important not to drop the ball on that. In terms of cash flow and finances, again, sometimes you're running really close to the wire in those growth phases where cash flow can be a real challenge for a lot of entrepreneurs. I'm sure that's familiar space for many of your listeners, but being across your numbers and developing that financial literacy, I think, is something that has been important in all of the businesses that I've worked in. Again, even if it's scrappy, even if you're moving fast and things aren't done perfectly, just being on top of the numbers will, again, save you a lot of trouble in the long run. And then in terms of product development, especially in travel, and in all of the businesses that I've worked in e-commerce as well, where we're building physical products, having checks and balances in place around quality control is something else that I would recommend as a more corporate form of rigor to bring across to that startup environment.
Yeah, that rigor is really important. When you start scaling really fast and you start bringing on really your first hires, but especially when you start bringing on a bunch of people when you're scaling really fast, bringing that rigor in is really important. But it's also really hard, like you mentioned, for that initial startup team that was there in the beginning. How are you able to, with your background in corporate and your new life in the tech startups, in the tech world, how are you able to resolve that tension between the people who are like, no, we all just do everything all the time and it works great, and then the more seasoned folks who are here and saying, we need to create some systems, we need to create some processes?
It's really challenging. You're sort of stewarding the culture of your company through the growth, and you want to hold on to what created the magic in the first place that's attracting people to want to work for the business. And often it's in that scrappy startup, kind of loose, playful atmosphere. People enjoy working in that space. But the company has to grow. It has to grow up and kind of transition from being a teenager to being an adult in a way. And culture is a really important piece of that. So I think having a clear vision and communicating that clearly to all members of the team frequently. And sometimes you have to repeat things several times before it actually drops in for people. And I think communicating the vision as well is really important. When you're scaling rapidly, most likely a lot of people on your team are going to be very stressed and very fatigued, because it's just the reality of hypergrowth like that. And it can be very easy for people to get caught up in what's hard about their role. But if you can keep refocusing attention to, I know this is hard, but this is where we're going and this is where we've come from. Look how these amazing things that we've achieved, and keep instilling that vision and keeping the team all pointing in the same direction. I think that can go a long way to bridging that gap. And then for the older staff members, I think something else that happens in a lot of startups, every founder that I've spoken to who's been through this transition phase has struggled with this, where you might have one or two employees who are all-rounders. They're doing lots of different things. They're doing a bit of customer support. They're doing some accounts payable. They're maybe managing the back end of the website. And as the business grows, there's an opportunity for those people to grow with the business. And I think a lot of founders will want to take them along for the ride and support those team members who have been really loyal and been committed from the beginning. But it's not comfortable for those people because they're having to give up parts of their role usually and move from being an all-rounder to stepping into a more specialised role. And that continues to happen. Then they might step into a more specialised role in customer support, and 12 months later, there's actually a customer support team. So their role is changing again. Their day-to-day function is changing. And there's a lot of skill in that kind of change management. And I think the biggest thing that I learned is that as much as we can apply these kind of corporate management strategies, at the end of the day, we're all human beings. And when you're in growth like that, it's pretty uncomfortable for most people a lot of the time. One of the founders I worked with said startups are the ultimate personal development course. And I really think that's true, because you get pushed, everyone's pushed and stretched every day. So maintaining those kind of personal, and you're not crossing lines between personal and professional, but relating to your team members as human beings who are navigating change and just speaking honestly and openly to that, I think can be really helpful in bringing those early stage team members along. And also sometimes it doesn't work out, and sometimes someone's joined the company because They enjoyed the lifestyle of being in a startup when it was kind of relaxed and a bit loose. And now it's turning into a more serious corporate enterprise. And that's not aligned with how they want to live their life or their values. And so sometimes there's painful conversations where you say goodbye to those people who have been really pivotal in the early days. And I think it's just being kind of pragmatic about that as well.
Yeah, and that's the best thing you can do for someone, right? If they're going to be unhappy in a more corporate culture, they want to be very entrepreneurial, they want to be running around with their hair on fire, solving those problems every day. That's the best thing you can do for them is to have a conversation, a very difficult one, albeit, about maybe this isn't the best place for you, and we love you, and we're still going to be friends, but let's set you up for success and find you something that's more suited to what you want to do, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that those conversations, whether it's initiated by the employee or the business, you can have those conversations with a great deal of compassion and nurture that person through to whatever their next journey is going to be as well. It doesn't have to be again, you need to have that rigor in place of what happens when someone's exited from the business, but you can still hold humanity in that and support them into whatever's next for them. And I think the other thing I would add with how you bridge that gap is for the people coming on board later, like the experience we had at Tripadil of these very senior travel industry professionals walking in and going, oh my goodness, how is this business? Because it's crazy when you grow like that. It looks shiny and hockey stick growth from the outside, but on the inside, there's a lot of duct tape holding it together. But something that I found helpful was telling the stories, like the lore of that company, of how we got here and what we've traversed and what we've overcome. Because most often in a corporate environment, people haven't had to navigate challenges of that scale and keeping the company afloat at times when it looked like it was going to go under, and all of the rabbits that we had to pull out of the hat to get to that point. I think that storytelling, so there's like a shared sense of not just where we're going, but also where we've come from and how we got here, can help to bring those newer members of the team who are maybe struggling with the scrappy startup culture to help them really commit and connect to the background of the business as well.
It's great to hear that you're working with startups that are doing that, because we have something very similar in the military. We have squadron history, unit history, and everyone learns the squadron history, tell the stories, and it's really important for connecting us to the past and connecting to the future, especially as missions change and budgets change and the day-to-day grind of being in the military. Sometimes it's really hard. And but having that shared history to connect to is really important in a military squadron. So I'm glad to hear that that's going on in the civilian world, especially in the startup world, and glad you're finding it effective. So besides Groupon, besides travel, you worked for a tech company that was involved in neuroscience. So what did you learn from working for that company about neuroscience that we should all know as leaders?
Oh, yeah, this is such a juicy topic. And I love what you just shared about the military. I think I didn't know that either. And I think storytelling is such a fundamental human trait. It's such a fundamental part of how we share information, and it's so important. So, yeah, I'd love to hear that. So I worked for 2 years alongside an incredible nervous system educator called Jessica Maguire, co-facilitating programs all about nervous system regulation. And this is based on the work of Stephen Porges, Porges, if anybody wants to look him up. And he is the father of what's known as polyvagal theory. So I won't go too deep into the science, but anyone who's been to a yoga class has probably heard the teacher say, we want to come out of the sympathetic nervous system state, that's fight or flight, and drop into the parasympathetic. We're going to do some deep breathing and come into the parasympathetic nervous system state. Sometimes that's called rest and digest, in that kind of binary framework that you might be familiar with. And polyvagal theory has superseded this idea of this binary framework where sympathetic is bad, and that's fight or flight, and parasympathetic is good. And it actually acknowledges that the parasympathetic nervous system has two branches, and this is all governed by the vagus nerve. So sympathetic is fight or flight, that's correct. But within the parasympathetic nervous system, we have the ventral vagal state, which is the good state where we feel calm and relaxed and regulated and kind of open and at ease, and we're socially connected and able to be present. And then there's the dorsal vagal state, which is a more primitive kind of response of the nervous system, and it's a state of collapse and shutdown. And it's a state that's less understood. So for leaders, especially if you're working in a stressful, high growth environment, it's very common to spend a lot of time up in that sympathetic state of hyper arousal where we're really on. And then we can crash down into the dorsal vagal state of hypoarousal, where you just want to pull the covers over your head and ignore the world. And you feel withdrawn, and there's a sense of hopelessness, like, oh, whereas in sympathetic, you think, I have to fix this, I have to do it now. There's a sense of urgency. When we crash down into that dorsal vagal state, it feels more like, what's the point? I just can't be bothered. I don't care today. And that's a very common cycle to fluctuate between those two if we constantly have our foot on the gas, which is very common for leaders under pressure. So I think what's important to know about neuroscience is that the nervous system is trainable and flexible. And once you start to recognize the state that you're in, that's the first step to regulation. So if you can recognize, my thoughts are racing, I'm feeling this sense of urgency, my heart's beating fast, I'm in a state of sympathetic arousal, then you can start to introduce body-based somatic practices to regulate yourself back down into that ventral vagal state in the middle. And the more we do that, the more we train our system to be flexible, because of course we all get stressed sometimes. We need to have that fight or flight response. It actually protects us. That's what it's there for. But we just want to develop the skills to A, identify it, and B, the skills to regulate ourselves again before we completely crash out, because that's the burnout loop, when we kind of crash down into that collapse zone.
Okay, so leaders and startup founders, when you are really crushing it, when you are firing on all cylinders, this is the moment to take a little time and pause.
Yes, absolutely. And I am as guilty as this of anyone, by the way, of putting my foot to the gas and going, I'm just going to keep going. You know, you start pulling these late nights and just want to get this project out the door. But, and we can, I think, something that all high performers share, whether it's an athlete or a superstar musician or a really successful business person, all high performers share a high tolerance for stress. So the more you kind of train your nervous system, you can spend more time in that state where you have some sympathetic arousal and you know that you're pushing it, but it's learning your own limits and knowing when to kind of pull it back in so that you don't crash.
Well, speaking about limits, you have worked most of your career between corporate and startups in industries that are pretty male dominated. What did you learn about yourself as a woman leader, and how did it shape how you lead now?
Yeah, this is so kind of fundamental to the work that I've been immersed in over the last year. I worked a lot in companies dominated by men, and where my peers were men, often quite a bit older than me as well, where I was kind of late 20s, early 30s, and my peers were men who were in their late 40s or 50s. And often that very alpha male kind of dominant energy, which is fine. I love working with men. But I think what it did to me as a younger woman was that was the language of power, especially when the whole team has this kind of bro culture, because I think whatever's at the top of the organization will filter down. It sort of sets the tone. So if you've got a very kind of alpha male CEO, it tends to filter down and set the tone for the rest of the organization. And so I found myself almost putting on a costume of masculine power, because it was like that was the language of power, and it felt like to hold my own, I had to operate in that way. And I'm very intuitive. I'm very empathetic. I really enjoy the human-to-human connection of leadership. But that felt almost like a weakness, even though, in fact, it was really fundamental to keeping those teams on track during those periods of growth. But in that particular language of power, it felt like I had to toughen up and kind of squash and suppress those sides of me and be very logical and very data driven and kind of unemotional. And it was really draining for me to do that because it wasn't authentic. It was like a costume that I was putting on. I didn't feel like I could be my authentic self. And then I became a mother. And since becoming a mother, I've worked more in female-dominated businesses, not by choice. It's just the way that it's worked out, which is interesting. It's the first time I've really put that together.
That's what we're here for on this podcast. We're helping breakthroughs.
Yeah, light bulb moments. Thank you. I think becoming a mother really redefined my relationship with myself and my body and my own power. I was like, oh, my power isn't the same as the men in my peer group. It's different, and it's not more or less, but it's just different. It's a different language. And I think also becoming a mother, I couldn't keep running, doing 70-hour weeks like I was doing before because my body I just didn't have capacity. And still my children are 4 and 7 now, and I don't want to go back to working those full-time long-hour weeks like I was before because there's just not enough space to parent in the way that I want to parent. So I had to kind of renegotiate what it meant to lead and what it meant to be ambitious, and what it meant. I had to sort of take stock and really, I guess, honour my female body, because previously having a female body that's cyclical and it feels like a weakness in that kind of power structure. But actually I think men and women bring different, beautiful, powerful qualities to the table, and it's just about appreciating the differences now. That's kind of the perspective that I have now.
Yeah, what I found when I was in the Air Force, our very best leaders, they had that power, they had that authority that you were talking about, but they also knew when it was time to use emotional intelligence. We didn't call it that back then, but to use emotional intelligence, and also providing psychological safety. And that's not something we can do all the time in the military. But when the time was right for that, when the time was appropriate, our very best leaders would do that. Tell us why emotional intelligence and psychological safety are so important to keeping organizations healthy and helping us lead our teams.
Yeah, I love these topics because they sound like fluffy terms. Oh, emotional intelligence, like it sounds a bit soft and fluffy, but actually there's a lot of research that shows that it's really fundamental to high performance. I had some stats up before. I think 90% of top performers, this is from the Harvard Business Review, 90% of top performers have high EQ, and EQ is responsible for 58% of performance in all types of jobs. So this is really important. This is our ability to connect to ourselves, connect to other people, to communicate effectively. And psychological safety is an aspect of this. And this term was coined by Harvard Business School professor Amy Edmondson, and it can be defined as felt permission for candor. So this is where teams feel free to ask questions or to voice concerns or to say, I don't think this looks quite right, where they feel safe to try something new and risk failing. And they know that's not going to be negative consequences of kind of stepping outside the box in that way. And in a study that Google did called Project Aristotle, psychological safety was found to be the number one trait of high-performing teams, more than the skill level of the members of that team or their education level or any other factor. It's about how psychological safe those team members felt. And I've really witnessed this not only in teams feeling free to try things and to fail forward and have that kind of energy and agency that comes when they know that it's safe for them to try different things or to voice what they're concerned about, but also a lack of psychological safety where people are living in a state where they're uncertain, they're not quite sure where they stand, there's fear of negative consequences of any action they might take. It sort of shrinks a person's performance. And I think to go back to the nervous system work, I witnessed this in particularly at Tripodil, where it grew very, very quickly and the teams were shifting. We had new departments starting every few months. People were shifting up sideways in all different directions across the business. And there was a real lack of, it felt quite unstable for those team members a lot of the time. And some people love being in that environment and thrive on it. And some people find it really unsettling. And it can put you into a sympathetic nervous system state where you're in fight or flight, you don't feel safe. Like if you think going back thousands of years, if you knew there's a tiger prowling around, all your blood is rushing to your extremities in case you need to run. It's very hard to just focus on the work that needs to be done and to do your best work if you're in that state of fear. So it's something that I've really tried to embed in my teams, not just by giving people permission to speak freely and to give me feedback. You know, if they don't agree with what I'm doing or they think I handled something badly, I'd rather have a conversation about it and have that open dialogue. But the other thing I try to really instill is letting people know that if there's a problem with your performance or your role or something, we're going to be having a conversation about it. So if we're not having a conversation, then don't worry, because I will be talking to you if we need to.
Yeah, and teams that don't have this psychological safety, they run the risk of losing their top talent. People get fed up and they decide to go. How do we identify someone on our team who might be a flight risk, and what do we do about it?
Yeah, I think the landscape has shifted a lot, especially since COVID and the advent of remote working has just opened up. You know, previously I might just, as a candidate, I might just be looking for jobs within my local area, but now I can work anywhere around the country, if not around the world. So the balance of power feels like it's shifted a lot more to candidates in the last few years. And employers really have to be ticking the boxes in order to keep their best performers and really offering a really positive working environment. And this concept of someone being a flight risk, again, I think it comes back to having open conversations, having the rigor of regular one-on-ones with your team members. And that's kind of the framework and the structure. But then within those one-on-ones, cultivating that emotional intelligence so that you can say, you know, I had a team member some time ago who we had a new person starting on the team and she was obviously feeling threatened and unsure. And we had a first sit down with this new team member, which was supposed to be a really positive introduction to the business, get this new person excited and on board. And the existing staff member was quite rude and withdrawn and just not herself. And the new person left. And the two of us, this staff member who'd been a little bit rude and myself, were left. And because we had a really strong rapport and I'd cultivated emotional safety with her, I just turned to her and said, "What's going on? Like, what was that about?" And we could just cut straight through any kind of professional facade. And she actually burst into tears and said, "I'm just feeling really stressed and da-da-da." And we had this beautiful, very human conversation that took about 10 minutes because we had that foundation of connection and trust and safety. And it can be tricky to tread this line sometimes because I don't recommend, you know, becoming best friends with all your employees because that can cause problems down the line as well. But when we can just relate to each other on a very human to human level where we cultivate the space for trust and safety. And sometimes that comes from vulnerability as a leader as well. You know, if I open up about things that I might be struggling with and not over, it's a fine-tuned balance, right? Like we don't want to dump on anyone, but if you can create space where you're sharing back and forth and cultivating that trust, then when problems arise, you can address them very quickly. And you'll also be aware if someone is a flight risk because you'll have that close connection. They're not just going to suddenly resign one day and have it be a total shock to you because you're close enough to them that you would have known that that was coming.
Yeah, I love that you use the word rapport because it's not about being friends or necessarily being engaged in people's personal lives. You can be, and that's okay sometimes. But thinking about it as a kind of rapport you have with your team and your coworkers is maybe a helpful way to think about it. That you don't have to be their best friend, but you do have to have a connected relationship with them.
Yeah, I think that's a really good distinction to make, and I agree.
Well, now that we've gotten on the downer of people fleeing our companies, let's take a break from the seriousness and play a little bit of a game. Are you up for a game?
Sure.
All right. The name of this game is Rapid Response. I'm going to ask you a series of questions. I want you to respond with the first thing that comes to your mind. Now, it doesn't need to be a one-word answer. Elaborate as much or as little as you'd like to. We just want to get to know what's on your mind when we think about these things, okay?
Okay.
Are you ready?
Ready as I'll ever be.
All right. Madeleine Eliza, rapid response round. Your time begins now. Podcast recommendation.
This is not business related, but in terms of personal relationships, I love Esther Perel's Where Should We Begin?
That's a great one. Most of the podcasts I listen to have very little to do with business or leadership, and they have to do with art, entertainment, psychology, all kinds of things that don't relate directly. Well, you wouldn't think directly to what we do and what we talk about here, but they do relate directly to what we're doing. So always great to get a recommendation of something that isn't so on the nose of what we're talking about here today.
Yeah, I think it all filters in.
A leadership skill we should all be working on.
Self-regulation.
Someone we should all be paying attention to.
I've been looking at Sharon Blackie's work. She's a writer and she writes a lot. She's kind of at this intersection of psychology and mythology and kind of feminine leadership, and she really speaks to me in the work that I'm doing. I find it
all right. We'll all have to check that out. What is either your get pumped up song or your walk on music?
I don't know if I've got one particular song. I go to kind of progressive house quite a lot, like Deadmau5 I love. Kind of loud house music, I would say.
You would be surprised how many guests we have on the show who say something like that.
Yeah.
It was a lot more than I expected when I started this podcast. The biggest influence in your life?
My children.
A book everyone should read.
The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk, just on that whole concept of the nervous system and the brain-body connection. It's a good one.
That is a good one. I have not read it yet. It's on my list. I need to check the library and see if my hold on that is ready yet. So, all right. So you were in Australia. I don't know why I'm explaining this. Our audience knows this. You are in Australia. It's going to be wintertime down there. It's going to be summertime up where we are. What is the best wintertime activity where you are in Australia?
Well, I hate to say this. It's actually it's early June now as we record this, and it is wintertime officially, and I'm planning to go to the beach this weekend because I'm very lucky to live in this beautiful spot where it never gets all that cold, and it's been raining for weeks and it's finally sunny. So that's my plan.
Yeah, if you're not familiar with Queensland, it's very much like our American Southwest, although much greener. So yes, it's kind of like Southern California. It's kind of always beach weather, except that the water might be a little cold.
Yes, yes, we're very lucky.
What is your dream vacation spot?
I'd love to go to the Maldives, just on the topic of beautiful beaches.
Yeah, which is actually much more achievable and closer for you than it is for any of us here.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
What is a future work trend you're excited about?
I'm excited about AI, and I think we're just scratching the surface. And I know a lot of the founders that I talk to are hesitant and feel like they need to catch up, like they haven't really touched it much yet. But I'm excited about the way that it can not take over our cognition, but just enhance it and kind of expedite it. I feel excited about that and hopeful about the possibilities.
Agreed. It seems everyone is either like full gas pedal down on it or doesn't want to touch it. And there's
yes.
If interested in how you're going to use AI in the future, just start using it. You don't need to be gas pedal down like some people are, but go ahead and give it a try.
Yeah.
All right, last one. Favorite sports team or player?
Oh, this is a hard one because I'm really not a sports gal. I like Serena Williams and her fire and energy and power. That'll be my answer. I'm not very well informed about sports players.
That's okay. That's okay. We've had people come on here and go, not a sports person. Yeah. Don't know any teams, don't know any players. Next question. All right. Well, thank you for playing our game. You were a good sport. It's always nice to get to know our guests a little bit in a way that's different from the leadership and business questions. Yeah, but to get back to it, you've been through some personal challenges over the last few years. How did you find your way through all that, and what lessons can you share with us?
Okay, I guess for context, I became a mother, as I mentioned. I've got a 7 and a 4-year-old, and shortly after my second child was born, I went through a divorce. And so it's been a very challenging few years of navigating everything that comes with that, with small children in tow. And I've really faced myself, I think. That's in terms of how I've navigated it. I've really faced all the shadowy parts of myself that I was maybe hiding from, because I think when you go through a rupture like that in your life, I felt like I needed to take stock and go, okay, how did I get here, and what do I need to unpack, and what are the learnings here? So, and all of that embodiment and nervous system work has been really fundamental for me in learning how to move the pain and the grief and the anger and all of that through my body and not let it kind of build up and fester. And through that, I've developed a pretty... I grew up I grew up around the church, so not in a very religious family, but I went to a religious school and I went to a youth group for a while, like an evangelical youth group, and I was actually baptized as a teenager, but I wouldn't have said I was a particularly religious person. But spirituality has played a big role for me the last few years in, I think, excavating those layers, and that's why I've become interested in the soul, because I've realized that where I've ended up now feels a lot more aligned with my soul truth in a way. And I guess I've had a deeper interest in spirituality, and I've been studying different Eastern spiritual traditions, and really cultivating that connection, not just with myself, but also with the divine, God, source, whatever you want to call it. That's become really a big part of my life and my personal practice, and it's definitely supported me through the challenges of the last few years, is just finding that trust and faith and connecting to something greater than myself.
You mentioned embodiment. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that is and how can it help us in our work as leaders?
Yeah, I think this is a really good concept for all leaders to be across, because it's like we've been swimming in this water that we might not have been aware of, where Descartes 400 years ago said, I think, therefore I am. And this was the whole movement of rationalism, which has pervaded our consciousness until very recently. So the body keeps the score. Sorry, I'm jumping around a bit. I hope it will all make sense when I finish this little section. The Body Keeps the Score was published, I think, 11 years ago in 2014. And that there's been this movement the last 20 years in neuroscience, like this very cutting edge Western neuroscience, acknowledging that we are not just our brain, because this movement of rationalism kind of put forth that our consciousness is seated in the brain and the body is kind of like this dumb animal just following along, like the brain is in charge. And I think that's really pervaded the way that we conceive of leadership and this focus on logic and cognition. But actually, when we start to understand the way that the nervous system works and the brain-body connection, the vagus nerve is the main, like the superhighway of the brain-body connection. And 80% of the messages traveling up and down are coming from the bottom up. So the body actually has a huge influence on the brain, and we've always thought that it's the other way around and we just need to control our thinking. But if, for example, you're in that state of fight or flight, trying to think your way out of it is almost pointless because your system is flooded with stress hormones and your thoughts are going to be panicked. Like, you do much better to try and regulate through the body, bring yourself back down into a state where you're calmer and more regulated, and then think about how you're going to tackle whatever problem you're faced with. So embodiment is really just the practice of honouring the body as the lens through which we experience the world, our senses, the five senses we all know about, and then we've got the sense of proprioception, which is our awareness of where our body is in space, and also the sense of interoception, which is our awareness of our internal sensations. And this is what can help us to develop emotional literacy and really get to understand the state of our nervous system. And I think that as a leader, if we're just operating from the neck up in this very heady cognitive space, then we're kind of ripping ourselves off of all of the tools that could be in our toolbox when we start to understand the connection with the body and the importance of the body as well.
It's funny how it all comes back to what we were talking about before we played the game.
Yeah.
One of the things we were talking about was having those difficult conversations with employees. And we talked about rapport, and one of the things that's important, I think, is there's a difference between being nice when we talk to someone and being kind when we talk to someone. What are your thoughts on the differences between being nice and kind?
I love these terms. And I think especially for women in leadership, we are so socialized to be nice. And I think this applies to men as well, but it's one of the aspects of leadership that I really love working with women on, because we often find it very hard to overcome that impulse to be nice. And being nice is being pleasant and agreeable and not tackling anything that's too disruptive or too uncomfortable. But it's actually not very kind. So if you're being nice to your staff, you might brush things under the rug that actually need to be addressed. You might be sitting on a hard conversation that you need to have and you're not having it with that person, and you're pretending that everything's fine and you're smiling, but they can feel and sense that something's not fine, and it creates anxiety in them because there's dissonance. So it's actually not very kind to operate in that way. And what is kinder is being direct and clear. And sometimes being kind means having those hard conversations. Brene Brown calls it rumbling. She says, be awkward, brave, and kind. And I love that, because it does feel really awkward sometimes when you take off that mask of niceness and just have a direct, honest, open conversation with someone about a problem that needs to be addressed. But yeah, I do think that is a kinder way to operate. It's more honouring of that person ultimately in the long run than just brushing over things and pretending that everything's fine.
Yeah, I think it's a much better solution to a difficult problem or a difficult conversation to think about it in terms of being kind instead of being nice. Mm. And again, I love the term, how do we set someone up for success, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of because you're giving that person feedback so that they can grow and develop and improve where they need to. And if you don't do that, then you're doing them a disservice, I think.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier you're excited about artificial intelligence. I think a lot of us are excited about artificial intelligence. It's moving really quickly. It's been really helpful, but there's some fear about it. How can we best use emerging technologies to enhance our humanity instead of limiting it?
We've talked a lot about the mind and the body and the soul, and I like to approach artificial intelligence through that lens, because if we take Descartes' concept, I think, therefore I am my brain, I am my mind, then artificial intelligence poses a real threat because it can think better than we can. Within the next 5 years, It's just developing exponentially in terms of cognition. But we're not just a mind. And so I think having this framework of I'm a human being, I have a mind, I have a body with its own unique intelligence that AI will never replicate because it doesn't have this very sophisticated engine of the human body that's evolved over millions of years and has these incredible biofeedback loops between the brain and the body and its ability to sense our surroundings and perceive danger and da-da-da-da-da. So I think grounding in the body as a leader especially is so important because AI will never be able to replace that. And similarly, we also have a soul, I believe. I mean, people believe different things, have different spiritual beliefs, but I believe we're a soul inside this beautiful vehicle of the body, and the mind is the tool of the soul to like do the soul's work. And again, AI, well, I mean, there's debates about this, isn't there, about whether AI will ever develop a soul. But I think it's something that's pretty defensible for us as living, breathing human beings. And so I don't think that AI is something for us to be afraid of. I think it is an invitation for us to step into a different operating system. So I started my career as a copywriter, and I think if I was still wedded to that identity, I would be feeling very uncomfortable right now because AI can write, like it can perform these cognitive tasks. But what it allows us to do, if you're a visionary, if you're a leader with big ideas that you want to execute in the world, it kind of gives you wings because you can take the seed of a thought and take it to the nth degree in a second. If you use these tools well, and I get really excited about that. And I think it's learning to use that to let our cognition really run with the enhancement of AI, because we can run further and faster than we can on our own. And I think that's really exciting. If you're someone who is a thinker and a dreamer and has lots of ideas, then there's exciting potentials there. And it means we have to step more into this space of creativity and strategy and kind of higher order thinking, and then use the AI as tools. But with that, it's like letting ourselves run ahead, using the tools while also staying anchored in the body and in the soul, which I think is this connection to whatever is higher. That's my take on AI.
All right, well, you heard it here. Follow your dreams, connect to your body, hold on to your soul, and everything's going to be fine. We talked a little bit earlier about masculine power and femininity in the workplace, and those are increasingly coming into conflict in the workplace now. What do you think is causing this, and what can we all do to work better together?
I think that what has happened, so we've had this dynamic where women have been suppressed for as long as anyone can remember. And over especially the last 120 odd years, we've had various successions of feminism. And particularly since like the 1980s till today, we've had this model of feminism which says women deserve to be in the workforce as much as men. We can do anything that you can do. And I am all for female empowerment, and I'm trying to word this carefully because I know it can be quite a sensitive topic. But
say what you need to say. The more controversial it is, the more views we'll get. So,
all right, I'll go for it. My experience of being a female leader and following that model of feminism, and I think this is why becoming a mother was so fundamental in my understanding of masculine and feminine power, is it's kind of taught us, you know, I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and I think for a lot of us during that time, we kind of grew up thinking that to have power as a woman, you have to kind of behave like a man, and being a woman is like being a man light, you know, that's the language of power. This is the dynamic I was speaking about before in workplaces that I've been in, where to wield power as a woman, you have to do it like a man and kind of suppress your feminine traits because they don't belong in this power structure. And I think what's happened with that is we're then trying to compete as women. We're trying to compete with men on this playing field where the language of power is masculine, and we can't possibly compete with men in a masculine game. And so then what we're doing is asking men to be less. And I think there's a lot of problems with violence against women. There's ongoing oppression and inequality. I don't want to minimize any of that, but what I'm seeing in a lot of feminist rhetoric in the last, especially since Me Too, it's like 2017 till now, there's a lot of women really hating on men and the masculine and demonizing masculinity. And we talk about toxic masculinity a lot, but it's like we've conflated the idea of toxicity with the idea of masculinity, and suddenly all masculinity is toxic and men just need to be less so that women can rise. And I don't think that that's very healthy or helpful, because, of course, masculinity is not inherently toxic. And the approach that I advocate for is for women to stop trying to put on this posture of masculine power, which is so inauthentic and exhausting, and actually sink back into their own innate feminine power, which means doing all that dark work that I've shared that I've had to do, of really facing myself and going through the shadows and eradicating shame and breaking up with the good girl who wants to please everyone all the time. Like, when we do that work and we can actually stand in our own power and stop feeling like we have to pretend to be a man, then it's like, oh, men can be men. That's fine, because I'm not a man, I'm a woman, and we're different, and there's more of a sense of ease with that. So, yeah, I think the work that's there for women to do, because the other thing is that a lot of this rhetoric around toxic masculinity and inequality and the gender pay gap, it's making men the problem all the time. And I would argue, for the sake of being a little bit controversial, that for most women, there's more space available for each of us to take up, and we're actually not taking it up because we're sitting in this shell of shame and disconnection from ourselves and our bodies. And it's much easier to throw rocks outwards and say that men are the problem than it is to actually look at, well, how am I oppressing myself? And this goes back generations. If we look at epigenetics, in the 1600s, women were getting burnt at the stake for being too much. So successions of generations of women have learnt to shrink and hide. But the reality is that in most of the Western world now, certainly for listeners of this podcast, it's safe for women to take up space. And I would invite female listeners with love to look at where you can take up more space, where you can use your voice, where you can advocate for yourself more strongly and do the inner work so that you can show up in that way. And of course, there's work for men to do often as well, but I'm all about self-responsibility and advocacy and empowerment. And I think that it's much more empowering as women if we look at, well, what can I actually do to expand my sphere of influence right now without needing anything external to change at all? I'm willing to bet that for a lot of women listening, there's maybe more space to take up just as things already stand. And when we do that, and when we really reckon with our own power as women, I think it levels the playing field more, where we can go, oh, okay, you're in a masculine body, like with masculine energy, and that's okay. I'm no longer threatened by that, because I recognize that my energetic kind of makeup is a little bit different, and they're both equally valid.
I think a lot of people would agree with you and be happy to hear you say this.
It feels a little bit controversial, but I have a bee in my bonnet about it. I just feel so strongly that we can be doing much better than we are. And the more that we as women point our finger at men, like a lot of men are really trying to be allies to women and to support women. And yeah, I think we could do better at working more in harmony together.
I'm here for it. I love it. So what's the big picture goal for Bhakti Lab? Where are you taking the company, and who are you looking to help most?
I started this company really to work with entrepreneurs in this integrator role, like the work that I have been doing, but to be able to do that more at scale and work with more entrepreneurs. But what's really calling me, as you can probably hear in the last 5 minutes of the conversation, what's really calling me is to work more closely with female leaders, with founders and executives on the inner work to help them claim all of their own personal power and to have their biggest, brightest impact in the world. So that's what I'm building. There's an epidemic of female burnout. Women are experiencing burnout exponentially higher rates than men, and this has been worse since COVID and working from home and the collision of home and work life that we've seen over the last few years. And I'm interested in supporting women because nearly every founder that I talk to is struggling with this. And I'm interested in supporting women with the tools, both from an embodiment kind of nervous system perspective and also with some of these spiritual traditions that really teach us to relate to the body as a vessel of the divine and to foster that connection with that higher power. That's the space that I'm moving more and more into, working more directly with female leaders.
Well, we've got more than a few female founders like that here in the States. So if you ever make it up this way, we'll make some introductions for you.
Oh, thank you so much, Jason. I appreciate that.
You also have a podcast. Tell us all about that.
I do, yes. My podcast is called The Madeleine Eliza Show, and it was a soul-led moment for me where I had this body of work and all these ideas like I just shared about masculinity and femininity and leadership and spirituality and embodiment, and it was really a vehicle for me to share those ideas more broadly. So there's episodes about all different topics, and you can find that podcast on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and on YouTube as well.
Yeah, everybody go check that out. We will link that up for you in the notes. What else is coming up for you in 2025?
Thank you. I will be releasing some new programs soon, some community offerings. I've just completed my Kundalini yoga teacher training actually last week. So I'm folding that in as well. It's a really powerful tool for energetic mastery, really, which is at the core of a lot of the work that I'm doing. So yeah, less one-on-one client work in building businesses and more group offerings to support women to really claim all of their power and their leadership and their agency and have their biggest impact.
That sounds great. So for everyone watching or listening right now, what's one step we can take today to help us connect our brain, our body, and our soul to help us be better leaders?
So many different things I could offer. I would say that if you find yourself stepping out of regulation, like if you start to feel, and it can take some practice to recognize the signs as well, because a lot of us have learnt to just numb and dumb those uncomfortable feelings. We doom scroll, or we watch Netflix, or we have a glass of wine or eat some chocolate or whatever. I think one of the most powerful things you can do is not take that path of numbing and dumbing, and actually just, if you're feeling discomfort or a sense of unease in your body, just stopping and closing your eyes, maybe putting a hand on your heart and just kind of dropping in and turning your attention inwards and really tuning into what's going on inside. Because the more often that we do this, and this might happen, if you're about to go into a meeting, and just to give you a practical example, if you're about to go into a meeting that is going to be challenging, just taking 3 minutes before that call to sit and turn your attention inwards and be with yourself. I think the more we cultivate that capacity to be with ourselves, and then we can build out all of these skills in regulation around that. But it really starts with, instead of turning away from the discomfort, turning towards it to listen. I'd say that's probably one of the most powerful steps that you could take.
I love that. I hope everyone watching or listening will try that. Madeleine, this has been so delightful. I've learned so much from talking to you today. Where can everyone find you so they can thank you for joining us?
Thank you so much, Jason. It's been such an honor to be here with you. I've really enjoyed our conversation as well. I think the best place is my website, which is madeleineeliza.com, and you'll find all my links to different platforms from there.
All right. Well, everybody go check that out. I want to thank you all for watching and listening today. If you found this conversation valuable, go ahead and share it, leave a comment, and don't forget to subscribe. If you're on a podcast platform where you can leave a review, please leave us a 5-star review. It really helps build the audience and get our stories with these great guests out to a much bigger audience so they can share in the lessons we've all gotten to learn today. We've got lots more amazing leaders coming your way, so go out there, do great things today. Onward and upward.